Well, hello everyone. Welcome once again to Luke Reacts. I'm once again here with the one and only Jesse Rojo. Jesse and I were there was a lot of different things that we could have done today. There's an impending war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran and Iran's proxies. Uh, the Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, just announced that her pick for her vice presidential running mate will be the governor of Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, and all that's in the news. All that's in the news, and I would love to talk about it, but I feel like there's so much speculation on the war with Iran that it's a little bit like we're just swinging, you know. And I don't know if we're gonna contact any balls being thrown, right? And then the other thing is like it's just all brand new with the reporting on the VP pick. So there's not a. I'm also not really wanting to weigh into that so badly. Um, we will at some point, I'm sure. But what I really want to get into and what I'm excited about is me and Jesse are going to talk Bible here for a bit, which is fun. Jesse and I, we met a decade ago, and our first meeting was at a restaurant in New York City, Hillstone, great restaurant, and we argued about Reformed theology and predestination and all these things for at least an hour or two. So, and we really didn't ever stop.
Yeah.
You get me and Jesse together, and we just we start, bumping around, and next thing you know, we're picking up Bible passages, and it's all that kind of stuff. So it's super fun. And so one of the things that yesterday there was there's this whole stream of they call it that of Catholics in particular, but it's not just Catholics. It's also also a bunch of Reformed Presbyterian type guys also are kind of weighing in on this stuff that are really they're going after Israel, they're going after Jews, they're going after Christian Zionism. And this one guy makes a post. He makes this post uh on he makes this post on on X, and he says, basically Christian Zionism is a heresy. And I took issue with that, being that I consider myself a Christian Zionist. And in his post, he says that no Catholic should ever harbor, much less express support for the state of Israel. And he quotes Pope Pius X, who was at the time with Theodore Herzl. There was this kind of the talking about what would become Zionism as a political entity. And Pope Pius was like, was not into it. He was not having that, right? And the interesting thing is there's also at the same time, that you have Pope Pius was against it. There were other Christians that were very favorable towards Theodore Herzl. There was actually Christians that were very strongly supportive, and not only supportive, but at the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland. And so, anyways, my response to all of this was very provocative, as one might imagine. I said Jesus was a Zionist, as were all the writers of the New Testament. Okay, so that was my throwing out there. So I thought, Jesse, let's get into that. What is it that, was Jesus a Zionist, and is Jesus a Zionist? I guess, first of all, we have to decide if it's a was or an is. I guess it's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I have T-shirts forthcoming that say Jesus was a Zionist, which are funny and
Yeah.
provocative, as one might imagine, right? But Jesse, what do you think? Do you think Jesus was a
Well,
Zionist?
we have to ask ourselves, what is Zionism in many ways? I think a lot of people like to separate its political connotations with its religious foundations. And
Yeah,
Zionism, even in its modern political um, expression, did not came from a vacuum, right?
right,
It just wasn't invented by Theodor Herzl in the 19th century. It came
right,
from thousands of years of the Jewish people expressing desire to return to Zion, right? We all heard this phrase before, but during Pesach, during um, um, Holy Week for Christians and the Passover holidays, for thousands of years, that would be
right,
they would greet each other and they would dismiss each other by saying next year in Jerusalem, next year in Zion, and that is supported by the hundreds, if not thousands, of passages in the Bible that talks about the return of the Jewish people, and in many occasions we've seen them return from exile in the Old Testament.
right,
So, and it's this place called Zion, which, by the way, is not just the Jewish people that express a deep connection to Zion. It's God Himself.
mm,
It's God
right,
Himself who said, "I will return to Zion." And I will defend Zion. Zion is the seat of my throne. And you see numbers of passages where God takes ownership, not of Santo Domingo in Dominican Republic, although I would have loved it would have been the capital of Dominican. I love DR. It was in Paris in France. It was Zion. It was Jerusalem, and that's a big deal. So how are we surprised that the Jewish people for thousands of years would never lose this connection? Who the Creator Himself has a deep connection to this place.
right,
And so, yeah, for me, when you think about whether or not Jesus is Zion, you're asking me is whether or not the return of the Jewish people to Zion, whether or not the restoration of the land of Israel is a biblical promise, is a biblical truth, which it is. Perhaps
right.
Zionism, the actual term, did not exist in the time of Jesus, but if it would have, we would have described their connection to the land as Zionism, essentially. It had political
Yeah,
connotations.
right. Well, and I think that's the expectation is, the expectation of the apostles was that, particularly early on, and this was one of the things that Jesus kept reminding, trying to kind of pull them back from, was this idea that, Jesus was going to throw off the shackles of Roman occupation, right? Like it was you know, it was a province of the Roman Empire, right? So they had a degree of self-determination, the Sanhedrin, which was the 70 leaders of the Jewish people. You did have this kind of elements of self-determination, but they were still part of an empire. And the 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 expectation on on the part of most of the apostles was that if Jesus was the Messiah, then he was going to be the one to restore the throne of King David, right? Like, the and that was the expectation all along, right? And to the point that in his crucifixion, part of the mockery of Jesus by the Romans was to put over his on the cross itself, King of the Jews, in 3 languages, right? which was like, just let everybody know this is your guy, and there was already, I mean, King Herod was still around, so it was like it was pure mockery,
Yeah.
but it was still the expectation was that there was the expect what it you didn't have the moment we have now
Mhm.
where Jesus and the apostles were in that occupied Roman Empire. 70 AD happens, the temple is destroyed, 132, Bar Kokhba rebellion, Jerusalem is leveled. All the Jews are basically scattered at that point. Um, and then it's another almost 2,000
Right.
years before the modern restoration of Israel. But that talk about returning to the land began in the late
Yeah.
1800s, right? So you do have this anticipation that something's coming. And so yeah, so it's not you're right. It's not like it's a direct transfer. But we have to admit, I think, that when Jesus is thinking about um the restoration of all things, like Jerusalem is, I mean, it's in the end of the book of Revelation. It's not, to your point, Santo Domingo does not fall from the
No.
sky. It is Jerusalem that falls from the sky,
Yeah.
right? And it is this the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem and this and the gates are named after the tribes, right? So you have it's the this whole Jewish story, this Israel story is all the way through the whole of the
Yep.
book.
Yep.
And so to me, it's like I we started this whole new initiative called Generation Zion. And the passage that I grabbed for Generation Zion as kind of the building block of it is from Isaiah 2, which to me is like I love Isaiah 2 because it paints the picture of the nations, which is I am one of,
Mm.
right? I'm a representative of the nations. But it says, I'll just read it here. It says it starts off by saying the word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established on the highest of mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it, and many people shall come and say, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, let's to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his path. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between nations, and shall decide disputes from many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. That to me is the picture of how in a sense of world peace, right? Like
Yeah.
there we go up to the mountain of the Lord to learn of the God of Jacob. We learn of the law will go forth from Zion,
Mm.
the word of the Lord to the ends of the earth. And I think that's what, in a sense, this picture of like what one of the things that Jesus did was kind of universalize the message that was very particular to the
Yeah.
Jewish people, but I don't think it obliterates the particular promise to the
Yeah.
particular people.
Yeah.
But it makes a room for the nations, people like us, to go up to the mountain of the Lord.
Mm.
And then, it to me, it's the blueprint, right? So you learn of the God of Jacob, you learn of the law, and then you get world peace,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the
Yeah.
process. And it's not another
Yeah,
process.
you. I'm hearing you speak, and you're describing the process of democracy, of westernization of the world. It's literally how it happened. It started with the missionaries going out there and educating people on the values of the Lord, the Ten Commandments, the moral
Yes.
principles of the Bible. And so what happened as a result of that? The world became more free. All of a sudden now you're free to express your beliefs and you are free to be who you are without fear of
Right.
persecution, government persecution in particular. So I totally agree with that. And as you am let's hearing you speak, it reminded me of another verse that is connected to the verse that you read. Zechariah chapter 8, verse 20, describing what the millennium will look like in the future, says this: thus says the Lord of hosts, peoples shall yet come, even the inhabitants of many cities. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us go at once to entreat the favor of the Lord and to seek the Lord of hosts. And where do they go? I myself am going. Many peoples and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and to entreat the
Mm,
favor of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days, 10 men from the nations of every tongue shall take hold of the robe of a Jew, saying, let us
mm,
go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.
yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
these promises over and over again, and we could probably go into even more passages in the prophets, right? That always points to this political restoration of the nation, and this spiritual conversion that's supposed to happen as well, and they don't necessarily need
Mm,
to happen at the same time.
right. Right. No, and I think, but I also think that, part of what so it makes it very strange to me when people then say, oh, like this, the modern political state of Israel. Oh, that's just it's nothing like the Israel from the Bible, which is like why? Why is it not? Like to me, I find that to like the assumption is that it's not is the default assumption
Yeah,
is a strange assumption to me. Whereas to me, I'm surprised why people don't think it is
yeah,
because it's not like the political structure is what ensures God's participation and use of Israel for his redemptive plan,
yeah,
right? Like the you have the transition from Moses and Aaron to the judges, and then you have obviously Samuel, and they get a king and Saul, and then David, and this and then when they return back from the Babylonian exile and back to you have Ezra and Nehemiah, and like all along the way, there's a bunch of different political structures right there.
mhm,
And then at the time of Jesus, the Sanhedrin,
yeah,
right? Like it's not like that it's this consistent political structure. Okay, so if the political structure isn't consistent, does that mean that like in the whole of the Old Testament, God's like, well, I can't believe they picked the Sanhedrin. I guess I'm not gonna I can't be with them,
yeah.
or he said, oh, democracy, they what, the Knesset, right?
You make a
Like,
good point. I didn't think about that before, but in even in the Bible, you see political structure change over and over again, from the
right,
judges to the monarchs to the Sanhedrin, and when we're there, they were in exile as well. They had their
right,
different structures there. They had the representative among the nations, so their status as a people of God, as a nation of God, didn't change whether or not they were a monarchy or they were a series of judges or whether or not they were in the land or in exile.
right,
Yeah,
right. And so when we're looking at so when we're seeing people say, Christian Zionism is a heresy, or that like no Catholic can support the state of Israel, it it's a very strange thing to me, right? I think it's more rooted. I think it has a lot more to be like it's rooted in a I don't know. I tend to think it's animus. Actually, most of the time, it seems to
yeah,
be. Perhaps it's jealousy, envy
yeah,
that of the Jews for one thing or another, or their success. but even in places where they're not particularly successful, they're still, um, it, it's a very strange thing. I find it all very
Yeah.
strange. And so, one of the things that we often run into as well is that, to is whether or not, that what's the role of Judaism in this?
Mm.
How does, was what do you think? What do you think Apostle Paul thought of Judaism, Jesse? Tee that up for you.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a whole debate happening about Paul, right? The identity of Paul that's been happening for decades. And I got into it a little bit, but I think I came to the conclusion that it's probably somewhere along the middle. So I think what we confused is Paul's calling to the Gentiles, and all of a sudden we envision Paul as a Gentile himself, as if
Mm,
his apostleship to the Gentiles somehow um, was a conversion of Paul from Judaism to a Gentile believer. And when you look at the Bible, you look at the book of Acts, you look at the words that Paul says. I mean, for example, there are at least 5 occasions that I've noted, three in the book of Acts, one in his letter to the Corinthians, second letter, and one in his letter to the Galatians, where he's referring to Israel as my nation.
mm.
He didn't say, my former nation or the nation I once belonged to. In his mind, he never stopped being a member of that nation. And in the book of Acts, towards the end of his life, um, he says this to a group of Jews in Rome, the amongst the leaders of Jews in Rome, and he's stating the case as to why he has sacrificed his life for the calling of propagating the gospel amongst the nation. And he says, hold on, I had my Spanish Bible open. Let's go to the English. Verse 20 on chapter 28. For this reason, therefore, I have asked to see you and speak with you, since it is because of the hope of Israel that I am wearing this chain. So
Mm,
his calling was for the Gentiles, but he knew that this calling was deeply connected to the hope of Israel. So for him, it was a greater obligation to answer this call, not only because he saw the vastness and the universality now of the hope of what the Bible offers to the world, but he also wanted his nation to be restored. He wanted to bring hope to his people. And he says this on verse 21, and they said to him, well, this is their response to him, right? We have received no letters from Judea but you, and none of the brothers coming here has reported or spoken evil about you. So then they say that we desire to hear from you, and he goes to the following statement. Here we go. Wish to be liberty because there was, there we go. Actually, it says this before in verse 18. When they had examined me, they wished to set me at liberty because there was no reason for the death penalty in my case, but because the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar. And he says, brothers, though I had done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. So in his mind, he never violated the law. He always kept kosher, lived a Jewish life. And he told him that you guys have nothing to accuse me of breaking from the customs of our ancestors, of breaking any law. And here I am for the
mm.
hope of Israel. So as far as I see the Bible describing Paul, in his mind, he never stopped being Jewish and he never saw himself outside of Judaism, but rather within Judaism. So I think I heard a, a Jewish scholar one time describe Christianity as apostolic Judaism, which I love because that's basically what Christianity is Judaism based on the scriptures of the apostles, right? Of the teachings of the
Right.
apostles. But we're still a branch of Judaism that we cannot deny whether we like to or not.
Yeah, that's gonna bother a bunch of Jews, Jesse.
Hey, we can go to Acts
Um,
21.
I know, dude. X 21's good. X 21's good. So X 21, uh,
Acts
While
15 and
Jesse's finding
21,
it,
but
yeah, those are both key,
yeah.
right? Those are both, to me, those are both helpful for unpacking, what is the role of the nations in this whole thing. And I think that I I don't think, and I'm gonna just like, you know, here's where I think the line is actually is I don't think that we're we're a branch of Judaism, like as the nations in a sense coming up. I think we remain the nations. We remain I an American, the degree to which I mean you're American too, but you can say you're
We're a
Dominican or
wild
whatever.
olive branch as one
Right.
would say.
We're what yeah, but we're grafted in as nations.
Mhm.
Like I do think there's a value to the nations in
100%, yeah.
in in God's plan, right? So and we bring our kind of understanding of our values, our gifts, our callings, our passions, our interests, those which align with God's blueprint for human flourishing, those come with us. The hope is that the things that are evil that we have practiced as nations uh, go away, right? Like it was William Carey, the father, the father, the one of the early missionaries to Protestant missionaries to India. There was a practice called sati, Sati, which was widow burning. So, on the fire of the pyre of the husband, they would throw the wife alive to be burned to death. Um, and it was William Carey who put that practice to an end, right? Like, and that is a good thing.
Mm,
Um, and that is, I mean, there's a whole culture and richness and depth and uniqueness that God has put in the Indian people,
mm,
and those are good things. And then there's things like sati, which are evil. And so it's actually part of that transformation that comes out of the Bible,
yeah.
that India is made more and more, in a sense, is being sanctified, even though they are Hindu. It's you still get this. It's the process is still ongoing, right? But one of the things that before we get to Acts 15 and 21, one of the things I did also want to bring up is, this is, sorry, folks, this is a meandering conversation. It's what you get with me and Jesse. Um, there is that passage from uh, the the Beatitudes, right, where Jesus in the book of Matthew says, uh, what does he say? Pull up my glasses here because I'm that old. All right. Chapter 5, verse 5 of Matthew, it says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, that is a reference. There's two things there. One is that is a reference to Psalm 37:11, which I'll also read to you all, which says, "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." Okay, the the land in Hebrew, land is Eretz, right? Like it's Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, right? That's the assumption is like he's talking to Jews in the Beatitudes, right? In when he's giving his Sermon on the Mount, he's talking to Jews who understand that reference from Psalm, and the book of Matthew was written, most likely, most scholars will acknowledge that it was written uh, in Hebrew. At the very least, it was written in Aramaic. If not pure Hebrew, it was written in Aramaic, which would have understand the land, like that word earth there it comes out of the Greek side of that thing, right? But the meek shall inherit the land. is the land of Israel. And so you have this very strong connection to the land, even in the book of Matthew, even in with the disciples, and the promise of the restoration of the kingdom of David, which we believe Jesus is part of. Um, or the Messiah will come through, right? But to me, you have all of these throughout the whole of the Bible, this kind of picture of of the the understanding of the Jewish people at the time of Jesus is affirming of the of all that is political Zionism, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have all these references, not only in the prophets, but into the book of Acts and beyond, of how the nations come into it. And we are the
Mm,
nations. And we gotta be careful that we don't don't be like Paul time and time again tells us not to be prideful about being grafted
that's
in,
right. Yeah. Yeah. Not think of ourselves better than they because they disagree with us on the person of Jesus. I think this is one of the things that I have the biggest issue with when it comes to some of my brothers and sisters in Christ when discussing the Jewish community, and it's how they speak of all the other nations, how we should be
Mm,
merciful and graceful and understanding, although they're pagan, although they do, terrible things to other people, but somehow we have to demonstrate the love of God to them. But them Jews, they follow up that statement with, and it's this different standard that they apply to the Jewish people that is not reflective of the heart of Paul, of the heart of Jesus towards his own people. And I think is deeply sinful to have that type of attitude. Because, I just quoted another guy in X, I won't mention his name, but he was talking about the Bible says loving the world. Well, if you love the world and the world implies Israel, then
mm,
then at least on the basis of the universal reach of the gospel, you should have love for that nation because it's part of the world, and
yeah.
it's a very special part of the world that God has a lot to say about. But I wanted to show you another verse before we go into that Acts, because I've never seen this verse. Well, let's put it this way: I've seen it with new eyes ever since I did this study on Genesis 12:3. That's everybody's favorite passage, Genesis 12:3. People
Right.
love it and hate it, right? Because
Me too.
people use Genesis 12:3 to bless Israel because it says, "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you," the promise of Abraham. And for a long time, I used to feel uncomfortable. I'll be honest with you. I'll say it out here. I used to feel uncomfortable oftentimes when I would hear Christians quote that verse, because I don't know what was the intention, the motivation behind that. Are they using it as a talisman, as a lucky charm type of thing? Let me just bless
Mm,
Israel and I get blessed, right? Or
right.
are they applying that Bible promise as it should be applied? And I ended up concluding that yes, they are. Because first of all, you see one example in the Old Testament is Balaam and Balak, right? The prophet Balaam.
Mhm,
Balak goes
mhm.
for Balaam and wants him to curse the nation of Israel in the desert. They're not in the land of Israel yet. They're in the desert, right? So
Right.
he's referring to the people of Israel, the 12 tribes. And four times he tried to curse them and he ended up blessing them four times. On the fourth time, the prophet Balaam cites word for word Genesis 12:3. For I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And in Numbers chapter 24, if I'm not mistaken, 22 to 24 is the whole um, story of Balaam. And towards the end of chapter 24, you're going to see him quoting word for word Genesis 12:3, which is why he couldn't curse them, he could only bless them. But then let's go to the Gospels. Let's go to Jesus. Luke chapter, let me see, do I have it? Luke chapter 7. And Jesus is in Capernaum. And for those who have traveled to Israel, know that there's a beautiful archaeological site to visit
Right.
with a humongous synagogue. Um, in the center of this archaeological site in Kafar Nahum, Capernaum, and the house of Peter is there. But that synagogue is very special because although it's not the synagogue of the first century, it is believed that the foundations upon which that synagogue was built was the synagogue in the time of Jesus, or the foundations of the synagogue of the time of Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that that is the synagogue that is being referenced here, but it's very likely that it could be because it's in
Mm,
Capernaum, right? And look at what the scenario says. I love the way this takes place. So, verse 1, now when he had ended all his sayings and the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum, and a certain centurion's servant who was dear unto him was sick and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he said unto him, the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, the elders of the Jews, right? These are leaders of the Jewish community in Capernaum. They besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this. The centurion is worthy for Jesus to answer the prayer to heal his servant. And why is he worthy? For he loved our nation. Okay.
mm,
These are the elders of the Jews speaking to the Messiah of the Jews, the leader of the Jews here. Is saying, our nation, right?
mm,
And he built us a synagogue. This is why I think this is the synagogue in the first century. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent from friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that I should enter under my roof. So what Jesus do when the elders of the Jews came to him and stated the case as to why he's worthy, because he's loved our nation, he's built us this synagogue, he's been good to your people. Jesus answered
mm.
that petition. He didn't see whether or not the centurion believed in him as Messiah. He didn't see whether or not the centurion made a profession of faith. He
Right.
saw that the elders of the Jews vouched for him because he's been good to them. He blessed them. And so, as Genesis 12:3 says, you bless my people and you will be blessed. And this is why I believe Genesis 12:3 is implied here, because
Mm.
clearly this is the context of a Gentile blessing the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, and Jesus responding to that need on that basis. So
Yeah,
sorry, I said a lot
that's
there.
really no, that's really interesting. I when you brought up, Balaam again, sorry, folks, this is the
Yeah.
wandering conversation between me and Jesse. Um, it brought me to, I was I was lamenting to my pastor, a couple years ago that, it had been a decade since, um, since any church I had been a part of had taught out of the book of Revelation, which I think is really unfortunate.
Mm,
Uh, and then so my church did a series on Revelation, but I was struck by this whole passage in to the church of Pergamum, and this comes back to the
Balaam,
Balaam
yeah.
and Balak thing, right? Uh, he says, but he's, I'll read the whole section. To the church, the angel. Sorry, I'll start over. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum, write the words of him who has a sharp two-edged sword. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. Yet you hold fast to my name, and you do not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. But this I have against you. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. So also that you have those who hold the teachings of the Nicolaitans, therefore repent, blah, blah, blah. Keeps on going, right? But he's critiquing them. Do you have Jesus in this is the red letters, folks, okay? You have Jesus in the red letters rebuking a church in Pergamum by saying, "You have some who are with you who are putting a stumbling block in saying it's okay to act, to to um to like to eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality,
Mm,
right? Like that, you have to you have to know, right? You have to know the Book of Numbers if that's going to make any sense to you,
yeah,
right?
100%.
And it's calling out that, like, no, you don't, like, to me it's clear that, you know the story of of Jesus and the apostles' connection to the land and to the story of the Jews, it never went away. And so for people to say, oh, that's all done, Israel was, and the Jews were the egg from which Jesus hatched, and you throw away the shell,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And that's not how it is.
No, it's not.
Um, so, and we, as again, to kind of restate what Jesse said, like, we can't be prideful about our being led into this story. We gotta we it is
Yeah,
special that we get let in,
yeah,
but we can't be prideful in
yeah,
it.
100%. We're so quick oftentimes to, you know, make ourselves more important than the next person, and, look down on others that don't necessarily live faith the same way we do, and
Mm,
unfortunately, that happens even internally. Christians do that to Christians too, and, but we always have to go back to the beginning, go back to what the scriptures teaches. And by no means do we ever have a sense of superiority to nobody else, because
mm,
the very essence of the gospel is that you don't deserve anything. You don't deserve grace. You don't deserve mercy. You don't deserve, you, especially you. I mean, if we go to Ephesians chapter 2, Paul says, "You were not of this nation." Okay. You guys were far
right,
from God, referring to
right,
Gentiles, not to the Jews.
right.
And how did he distinguish that they were far from God? They were not a member of the people of Israel. So
Mm.
if you wanted to be close to God, you had to be linked to this nation. And this is why Gentiles, believing Gentiles love Jesus, because we understand that he opened the way for us to be grafted into the people of God without having to necessarily abandon our cultural and even our own political identities, right? So long as it's not idolatrous, um, of course, because if we see what's happening in Venezuela, it's an expression of political idolatry to a
Right.
figure who till today is considered eternal, right? It's shocking the way uh, people worship this man, but that wasn't the case in in the Gospels. It wasn't the case in the Hebrew Bible, and we need to come to terms with that and really be more thoughtful in the way we engage into these conversations.
I totally
Yeah.
agree. Totally agree. And so we've left people hanging
Yes.
here for a second or two, actually longer than that. So let's
The
get
Book of Acts.
we're not gonna keep people too much longer here, but two sections of the Book of Acts that I find very interesting. Uh, Acts 15, which is the Jesus meeting with the Council of Jerusalem. Not Jesus, but sorry, the
The apostles.
apostle.
Yeah.
And and then also Acts 21. Both of those I think are very helpful for us in this conversation. Let's unpack uh, Acts chapter 15 first. What do we have there? You have the early church after Jesus' death and resurrection. They're all getting together. Lots of people are accepting the Jesus Messiah, and then the stoning of Stephen happens, right? And the Apostle Paul, who's at the time Saul, enters the stage. But up until then, is very centered around Peter and Peter's kind of what Peter is up to. Now, Peter is the first one to kind of encounter these Gentiles who want to become they want to they want to follow Jesus, right? And you have the Gentiles being included, and it becomes more numerous and more numerous and more numerous. And so Peter's like, "What the heck? What do I do?" And so he goes to seek the advice of the elders. And where are the elders? They're in Jerusalem. And what is the council tell Peter and the others to do in regard to the Gentiles who want to worship Jesus as Messiah? It's like, all right, it's a very low bar. I appreciate the low
Yeah.
bar. Unfortunately, so many people can't even make the
Yeah.
bar, right? Uh, Basically, don't sleep around, right? Don't practice sexual morality. Don't worship idols, and don't drink blood. Okay? It's those 3
Yeah.
things, okay? Don't mess around, don't worship idols, and don't drink blood. Uh, and yeah, it's, even that seems to be hard for the Gentiles.
Yeah.
But where does that come
Dominic
from,
the
Jesse? That
Dom
comes
I was gonna
from
say Dominicans have this, great, little piece I don't eat it anymore, it's called morcilla, which is like dry blood type of meat.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, blood
Blood
sausage. I mean,
sausage,
that's a
exactly.
there's a yeah, yeah. No, there's a in England, there's a blood sausage, in Germany, there's a blood sausage.
I'm sorry, it's one of my
I used to,
used to be one of my guilty
I know
pleasures.
everybody's
No more though, no more.
no, but it's like in Taiwan, I used to, you know, go to Taiwan a bunch, and I would go with a bunch of 20-year-olds, and I was in my 20s and 30s too, and we would like test each other to what the grossest thing we could find to eat was, right? And and the grossest thing ever was this congealed pig's blood on a stick.
Ooh,
It was like in rice, it was like there was anyways, it was the grossest thing.
sorry to our
Okay,
Jewish listeners here.
I know. Sorry to our
Our new
non-Jewish listeners. Like, it's so bad. But, yeah, it was, again, it was like, this is for whatever reason, we're just, like, into drinking blood, I guess, as Gentiles, but, it all that comes out of the Noahic covenant, right? Those are the no part of the Noahic laws, which is what Jews to this day, expect as, like, what are Gentiles supposed to do? You're supposed to keep
Yeah,
those, right? And, the 10 commandments is very kinda like the 10
yeah,
commandments. But, so you have that expectation on Gentiles, uh, is that we're allowed to be let in, but we have, we have some things to
yeah,
follow.
yeah, 100%.
But unpack Acts 21 for us, Jesse, if you will.
100%. So Acts 21 puts to test what was deliberated in Acts 15. They came to a conclusion. This is what we agree. The Gentiles can be member of the people of God, but they don't have to be Jewish in the process. Yeah, they can still remain as Gentiles. And both chapters start the same way if you actually look at it, because Paul comes and he starts giving the good news on how of the conversions of the Gentiles, right? And it brought great joy to all the brothers. In Acts 21, Paul is talking to James, who's now the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and he starts with the same news. Look at all the wonderful things, and I think it's beginning in verse 15. Um, it says, and he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God. And then James, in response to that, look at what he says. You see, now he's talking about how the gospels are spreading among the Jewish people, and he says this. And when they heard it, they glorified God. And you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. And look at this, they are all zealous for the law. So although
Mm,
they believed, they didn't stop following the law. They care about the law. And this is what they've heard about Paul. And they have been told about you, Paul, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. And so what then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do therefore what we tell you. So it's funny. He's like, they ask us, what should we do? Well, never mind. This is what you should do, Paul, to prove to these Jewish brothers and sisters that it's not true what they heard of you. And this is important because the people who were confused were the Jews who lived among the Gentiles. And if Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles and he's preaching to Gentiles, don't follow the law of Moses, don't circumcise the children, the Jews that are living among them can receive a mixed message. Is he saying all of us,
Right.
or is he just referring to the Gentiles? So fast forward, what does Paul do? Well, this, for all of our and Reform brothers and sisters, for all our replacement theologian proponents, for those who believe that the church replaced Israel, or that the Israel plays no part in this. This is the part. This is the perfect opportunity for Paul to say, "Well, James, it's true. It's true what they heard of me.
Right. Right.
Yes,
Right.
now in Jesus, the law doesn't matter. Now in Jesus, no one needs to circumcise. No one needs to follow the customs. No one needs to follow Moses, because we are all new creation, and Jesus is the fulfillment.
The new has come, the old is
Right,
gone,
right.
all that.
This is the moment the apostle Paul, the greatest theologian in the history of the church, this is the moment for him to settle it once and for all. But is that what he does?
And this was like what, 25, 30 years after the death and
Correct.
resurrection of Jesus Christ,
Correct. Right?
right? So it's been a long time.
Correct. So this is not like, oh, we're still trying to figure this out. No, he's out there and he's preaching the gospel, and hundreds and thousands of Gentiles are coming into the fold, right? And what did Paul do? Is that what he did? Was that the argument he made? No,
He did
he did
not.
not. If you go if you go to so if you go to verse 23, continuing, do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself along with them and pay their expenses. So, in other words, Paul, you go do a sacrificial ritual at the temple, okay? And you put your money where your mouth is. You pay for them, you sponsor them. You
Right,
have to be
right.
their sponsor, because that's what's going to prove to them, to our brothers and sisters, that you are what? That thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself, Paul, also live in observance of the law. And then it goes, but as for Gentiles who have believed, who have sent a letter with our judgment, they should abstain from the sacrifice of idols, etc. So, okay, Paul, you prove that you're Jewish, but as for Gentiles, we've already settled the way Gentiles should live. But we want to settle how you are living your life. Are you living according to Jewish customs? Are you living kosherly? And then it says, verse 26, then Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself along with them and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification will be fulfilled, and the offering presented for each one of them. So there you have it settled, folks. Paul was Jewish, very Jewish,
Mhm.
and he proved it to nonetheless, his own Jewish brothers and sisters in Jerusalem, and going to the temple. And I'm not, for the sake of time, but I would refer people to chapter 18, and you will see that in the middle of Paul's journey, his missionary journey, he all of a sudden makes a pit stop. I think it was Cyprus, to
Mm.
to fulfill a Jewish ritual. That's all the verse says. He's on the way to propagate the gospel to the nations, and all of a sudden he makes his pit stop so that he can fulfill his Jewish ritual. So you can't say that in chapter 21, well, Paul did that to kind of reconcile issues and make them feel good. No, there was nobody watching him in chapter 18 in the middle of his missions. Nobody cared whether or not he was fulfilling his Jewish customs, but he cared.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think this is good, Jesse. This is amazing. I think there will be T-shirts forthcoming from our Generation Zion site that will have Jesus is a Zionist or Jesus was a Zionist on it. It's a great little fun T-shirt. And yeah, I think it's pretty clear to me that Jesus was a Zionist. perhaps not in the Theodore Herzl way, but also not uh, not doing away
Mhm.
with the uniqueness of the nation of Israel and its its role to play in God's redemptive plan.
Yeah.
I think that comes all the way through in the New Testament. So I no doubt believe that we will have lots and lots and lots of comments on this one. So it might garner a number two, a part two, where you and I unpack some of the pushback that we no doubt will get, which I'm happy to go into. For those who made it all the way through this, please like and subscribe to these videos so that we can do more, and also so you get the notifications when a new one comes up. And also remember that we at the Philos Project are supported by people like you. Without donations that come in, we don't get to do this stuff and help be a part of ensuring that the next generation of Christians, the current generation of Christians too, recognize that God has a special plan in place for Israel and the Jewish people. So, with all that, thank you, Jesse, for joining
My
me,
pleasure.
and we'll 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 be back soon. Thank you, everybody.